Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Kovacs, Vice President for Marketing here at the college, and I thank you for joining us today for this Dominican Forum. Most of you by now, I hope, have received a copy of the special edition from the Hill, which also contains the President's Annual Report to the college community. If you don't have a copy or you don't know where yours is, we do have some extras here. Please come see us afterwards. We'll be distributing them from the podium. But one of the things that I think is demonstrated in here is how our Dominican heritage is woven throughout our campus community. In today's presentation by participants who took part in conferences this past summer that proclaimed and explored the Dominican tradition, will further go into that topic. We are very excited to have our panelists with us today to share their experiences with us and to hear their perspectives on what it means to be a member of this Dominican community that is Albertus. So let me introduce our panel. Dr. Robert Bourgeois, who joined the Albertus faculty in 2005, is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Humanities, and he is Director of the college's Global Studies program. He does have some additional interests, which include West Africa, Indo-European epics, tribalism, Islam in the West, and ritual and pilgrimage. He is a graduate of Yale University, earned his MA and PhD degrees from the University of Chicago. Dr. Bourgeois. Our second panelist is Dr. Jeremiah Coffey, who is a professor of religious studies here at Albertus. He is the chair of our Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. He received his bachelor's degree from Our Lady of Angels Seminary, an MA from the University of St. Michael's College in Toronto, and PhD from Fordham University. And that would be Dr. Coffey. Corey Ann Schmidt is our Director of Academic Advising and Student Success, and previously she served for 5 years in the college's Office of Admission. She currently advises all first-year students, teaches college life and e-portfolio classes, and will be offering a service learning course in the spring. She tells us she's pleased to integrate much of what she has learned at the Dominican Colloquium into her work each day with Albertus students. Corey received her bachelor's degree in business management from Gettysburg College, and she earned her MBA here at Albertus Magnus College. And she has just begun her doctoral program in educational leadership at Endicott College. So, our moderator today is Sister Ann Kilbride, and most of us are probably aware that Sister Ann joined the Albertus community in August 2011 in a new position of Special Assistant to the President for the promotion of Catholic Dominican heritage here at the college. In her present role, she is focused on assisting the college to as it seeks to strengthen its long relationship with the Dominican Sisters of Peace and to broaden its connection with national and international Dominican teachers and preachers. Sister Ann was instrumental in creating today's event and in establishing the recent Founders Day, which we all enjoyed and which is memorialized in this booklet. What you may not know is that Sister Ann is no stranger to the college or to the New Haven community. She is a former trustee of the college. She also received an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters here in 2009. And she graduated from the former St. Mary's High School, where she went on to serve as principal. She holds her bachelor's degree from Southern Connecticut State University and received master's degrees from the University of Notre Dame and Boston College. And then I would also like to recognize the fourth panelist who was not able to join us today, but I do want to acknowledge her participation. Samantha Suarez is a member of the class of 2015 in Albertus, and she attended the Dominican Preaching in Action Conference for college-age students and their mentors over this past summer with her mentor, Sister Helen Kieran, who is our Director of Campus Ministry. Samantha is not able to appear on the panel today, but we are confident that her Dominican experience this summer will positively influence her own life's path. So with nothing further to say, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Sister Ann.
Andrea's a little taller than I am, but thank you. And special thanks to our participants today. It is not easy to speak in front of your peers or your students, so thank you very much for your willingness to do this. And also I would like to thank President McNamara, the college, and the Dominican Sisters of Peace for their support in funding our attendance at these national gatherings. Margaret Steinfels, a writer and commentator on the Catholic life, comments on the Catholic intellectual tradition and origins, which we can by extension expand to the Dominican tradition. She says, "A tradition is a focus for questioning, a framework for inquiry, a standard for preferring some sets of ideas over others. Tradition is the record of the community's conversation over time about its meaning and its direction. A living tradition is a tradition that can raise questions about itself." A forum, such as the one we are having, allows this Dominican community, Albertus Magnus College, to have a conversation about what makes the Dominican tradition alive for us and for our community in the context of all our different roles at the college. In having this conversation, we add meaning and direction to the life of the college. Our hope is that you will join, all of you, in this discussion as you reflect on the experiences of the participants in light of your own role at the college today. Today we will hear about the experiences of our faculty and staff members that they had over this summer that delved into the Dominican tradition to discover its meaning for today, and most importantly, to help raise questions about our own Dominican institution. For example, what gives us our identity, our purpose, and will help us shape our future. Our student, as Andrea indicated, Samantha, is unable to be with us today, but she, along with Sister Helen Kieran, attended the Dominican College Preaching Conference with students, faculty, and staff from other Dominican colleges all across the country. Dr. Jeremiah Coffey, Dr. Robert Bourgeois, and Corianne Schmidt and I attended the Dominican Colloquium with other faculty and staff members from Dominican colleges across the country. Both of these meetings took place at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. Throughout these days, we had an opportunity to be in touch with the spirit of the 800-year-old Dominican tradition, which is made up of colorful people, stories, ideals, writings, and a few historical mishaps along the way. If you ask Dr. Coffey and Dr. Bourgeois about their trip to Chicago, you will realize that they have added another historical mishap along the way. But that's for a conversation after the forum. For the forum today, each participant has selected one particular experience they had at the colloquium to share with you. Following these brief presentations, I will ask some general questions to the forum presenters and then open up the forum to all of you for further comments or questions. We will begin with Dr. Coffey.
Hello? Hello, everyone. The workshop that I went to, that I wrote a report on, was a talk given by a woman from Dominican College in San Rafael, California. I think her name was Mary Ann Stickle, and I think she was an administrator, perhaps working in advancement or additions, the literature from the globe can tell us that. But she spoke about different kinds of ways in which the Dominican colleges are living out their Dominican heritage. And she provided us with a typology of Catholic institutions of higher education which she derived from a work by Melanie Marcy and John Polivic called Catholic Higher Education, a Culture in Crisis, which was written in 2006. And in that, she outlined 4 different types of ways in which Dominican colleges can be Dominican. There was the immersion model, the persuasion model, the diaspora model, and the cohort model. To give you a very quick idea, the immersion model would probably be the kind of model that Albertus Magnus College was in the 1950s. It tries to attract a large majority of students who are either already committed Catholics or hoping to become knowledgeable Catholics. Been there and done that. The persuasion model looks to inform all its students about the Catholic and Dominican tradition. The other 2 models, the diaspora and the cohort model, take into account that most of the students and most of the faculty are not Catholic and not Dominican, and less, even less so Dominican. And what they try to do is to serve both that wider population and also the cohort or diaspora of the Catholic population. I think the typology is useful because it will enable us to identify ourselves and give us a sense of where we can start to cultivate what it is we are and what it is we have. So I found that to be a very interesting session at the school. And I think this conversation should happen.
Well, I'll start by saying I wasn't sure what to expect and what kind of sessions would be offered at the conference. It was my first faith-based conference I was attending, and I was delighted that the session offerings were extremely relevant to what we were doing here at Albertus. The one session that stuck with me the most during the colloquium was titled Self-Reflection for Societal Change, Developing Self-Awareness in Social Work Students. The institution that was presenting had a strong social work program, and during the first year of study, those students would go into the field within a social work site, work with others, and their real emphasis was on self-awareness. They believed, using their Dominican faith, that understanding yourself will help you understand others and also serve others, and that it was important for their social work candidates to understand them, start with a conversation on self-awareness before they even began to think about helping others. And there was so much in the session that I found relevant to my work at Albertus. Teaching some of the first year courses of college life with our first year students and advising them, self-awareness is such a great, something to develop during their first year at college. And I really enjoyed their addition of a service learning component. And we then had conversations about this that are thinking about developing more of a service learning component in the first year program. And then ultimately this fall implemented a 3-year community service project with a book reading about someone else that went through a self-awareness process as well as serving others overseas in an international experience. And it's been extremely well received by our students. I don't know if I would have been able to prepare as well if I hadn't gone to this session. It's very motivational and extremely relevant, and I think that was what I experienced in all of my sessions, and I didn't know if it would be as practical into what I was doing every day. It was a fantastic experience.
Overall, I'd like to make a general observation that the Dominican colloquium was flawlessly executed and with attention to detail in every possible dimension. Aesthetically, spiritually, organizationally, it was impeccable. And I was deeply impressed. Not to mention the high level of scholarship at all sessions. The The session I wanted to report on was by Patricia Walter, OP, PhD. She was a professor of systematic theology at the Magnus Institute of Theology in St. Louis. She was prioress of the Adrian and Jacob Sisters, and she is now chairman of the theology department at Siena Heights University. And she spoke on higher education in the Dominican tradition. So what does that mean? Does it have any meaning for us? She focused on several themes, which I will mention by name, and then those caused me to reflect on what the Dominican tradition on higher education should be. So I'll begin by the themes. She grounds the Dominican life in mysticism, in an awareness, an ever-present awareness of the reality of God. At the outset of the Dominican tradition, there was a big debate between those who wanted to devote their time and their studies only to God and those who also wanted to study the world, faith and science, or only one or the other. And in this debate, Albert the Great, our patron saint of this college, and Thomas Aquinas argued vigorously that we must study the world. Otherwise, as Albert the Great said, we will be guilty of assassinating Socrates all over again. So I'm very proud that our tradition, early in the tradition, was someone who said that. So components of learning the Dominican tradition are a focus on the real contemplation of the real, so that on its own terms and without bias, we see the phenomenon in all its dimensions. We are guided by tradition, and Sister Pat used exactly the definition of tradition that you quoted from Marcus Steinhaus. But it's a legacy of the community thinking about itself and its identity through time. So it gives us a lens through which to approach reality. To cultivate looking at reality and perceiving truth with an awareness of what it is to suffering and with a vision that includes compassion. And the outcome of contemplation should be usefulness to one's neighbor and usefulness to souls. How can the Dominican College prepare citizens and saints and not just consumers? So I thought about this, and this is just to be perhaps a conversation starter at another time, but reflections on Dominican Catholic education should include 5 elements. One is the real. Gustavo Gutierrez, great Dominican liberation theologian, talks about la realidad. What does that mean? I think first it means an inductive approach, looking at the reality before we talk a lot about theory. At least in my experience as a teacher, when I start out charging out of graduate school, we're talking about theory. The eyes glaze over in history. Look at the concrete reality first, and then think about what that means. And then look at nature and the cosmos and our place in it. Do that. And contemplate humanity in its concrete reality, the success and failure in building a society where it is easy to be good. So first, the real. Second, the transcendent order. We are an interdisciplinary community of moral discourse, like other colleges, but a Catholic Dominican college pursues transcendent questions that's unavoidable if you're steeped in the Dominican tradition of good versus evil, life and death, justice versus oppression, grace and sin. These are big themes through which we approach reality and relate to the transcendent order. Beyond the Enlightenment model of pure reason and scientific method, which avoid implications of bias and which are essential, the scholarly life, but we also believe that values are relevant. The meaning of life is an urgent question. We want to grow in practical reasoning and adjudicate values in a manner which includes a place for the Dominican tradition, which is, as to quote again, a focus of questionings, a standard, a record of a community's conversation over time about its meaning and direction, a huge family album. Third, vocation in life. At a Dominican college, we urge students to see their deeper calling, to love, and to pursue service to others. And I think in such an order, experiential learning and service learning, which have grown so rapidly here, are natural and not just ancillary, but central to the vision of education. Fourth, Catholic in our way of being. All faiths and people of no faith should feel empowered and first-class citizens. And I think they do with everyone at Albertus Magnus College, which is an atmosphere of courtesy and respect for which I'm deeply grateful. But I think everyone should know that they are in a Catholic Dominican institution, which does not imply the imposition of beliefs, but dialogue in pursuit of truthful understanding. This pursuit entails the tension between tradition and current reality, and that is Dominican from the very beginning. That is the hallmark of Dominican started with Dominic, is we have a tradition, but how does it relate to these realities, and how must we adjust our understanding of our identity and tradition in view of current times and current realities. The Dominican tradition should become part of the common narrative and culture and identity of the college, perhaps more explicitly than it does. A tradition contains heroes, and the Dominicans, I just started to learn about the Dominicans to educate myself. There are so many heroes that we as intellectuals and Catholics can take great pride in and are inspirational. Heroes like Victoria and Montesinos and Bartolome de las Casas, who 500 years ago created a prophetic cry against the inhumanity and brutality with which the conquistadors were treating the indigenous of Latin America. And there are many Dominicans around the world who are right now, sometimes at great cost to themselves, engaging in dialogue with Islam. And the Dominican way is to pursue truth through dialogue, and the other person fills the Dominican inquirer with something that he or she lacks. And that generosity of spirit is part of the Dominican pursuit of truth. I think the Dominican Catholic tradition should cultivate the practice of living mythologically. That is, living out a narrative which structures our lives and our vision, so that we see reality with compassion and attentiveness to suffering and injustice, so that we discover the human face of God. As Richard Rohr said, if we do not live mythologically, we will live pathologically. And finally, so go ahead. Just the real, the transcendent word, vocation, Catholic in our way of being, and dedicated to the common good. So, which is a way for our Catholic community tradition to reach out beyond the boundaries of our college. So we say that in Albertus Magnus education is practice, the pursuit of truth in all its dimensions, and it's practical in its application. And it has some of these practices associated with it. Contemplation in the service of usefulness. Practicality combined with compassion. Finding truth in the middle ground between ourselves and the other. I think these are foundations of making a career in today's globalized world.
Thank you all very much for sharing those experiences. You know, in the busy everyday that we're running around doing things, sometimes we forget about why we do it and the meaning underneath it. And I think listening to our 3 participants reminds me of why we do what we do, why we go to class, why we teach, why we work with students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you. Now I'm going to ask our participants to respond to some questions which flow from their immersion in the experience they had at the colloquium and make this experience applicable to their work at Albertus. So the first question I'd like to ask the 3 of you is, you've told us about a session you attended. Can you also tell us about another aspect of the Dominican colloquium that impacted you? Corey, you want to begin?
As I mentioned earlier, I wasn't sure what to expect attending the colloquium. And when I reflected on this, when we started talking about our panel, I wanted to make sure it was okay to mention that I was raised Protestant, because I wasn't sure how well received that was going to be. And what I found was attending the colloquium was unbelievably inviting, warm, accepting, and I think above all, how closely connected I am with the Dominican values and beliefs. And that was extremely clear in the sessions we attended and how closely related they are to what I work on and the values I have, and that I hope our students will instill or develop while they're here at Albertus. It was a wonderful experience, and their commitment to educating and serving others is directly connected to my passions here at Albertus. I know now, I thought it before I went to the conference, but I really believe that attending the colloquium is that you don't have to be Dominican or Catholic to closely connect with their values. And I think that's something, at least I try to talk to students about and foster inside of them, that you can connect with all of our values no matter who you are, where you're from, and what you believe in, because we value education, educating others. Dr. Bourgeois pointed out a lot of examples in the past and today of how Dominicans are working towards this and how all of our students can connect with it and hopefully carry those values into their experiences after they graduate. And I think that's extremely powerful, not only for my reflection and my experience, but hopefully what I can instill onto the students moving forward after the program.
Thank you. Why don't you take the chair?
Okay. 2 things impressed me. One was hospitality. Sister Anne made reference to our historical mishap. Getting to Chicago, it took us 14 hours. We put up the bike in Chicago, about twice that time. And when we got there, we missed dinner, we missed the talk, we missed everything. And we got there, and people went out of their way to make sure we got food and dinner and get comfortable, and it was really that ordeal to receive that. But even more than that was were the people who attended the conference. Vitality, energy, intelligence, professional accomplishment, and mostly women. Gentlemen learn to cook. It was actually inspirational, and at the end of at the closing dinner, one of the participants from, I think, Coldwell College in New Jersey got up and made a toast to Dominican women, and it was fitting, proper, right, and just that be done, because at that conference it was evident that this is to whom time passed. So that's what sticks with me.
And Robert?
Is this working? Yes, it's working.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the courses that you and I share in the Insight course, and in other courses we teach, a lot of our students are detached from the roots of their traditions and believe, some of them, a significant number, that there is a contradiction or opposition between faith and reason, or faith and science. And there were many ways in which I was reminded that we belong to a both-and tradition, not an either-or tradition. In other words, it's not either I can accept science or I can have faith, but it's a both-and tradition. Thomas Aquinas said there are two books of Revelation, Scripture and nature came first. I appreciated this broad, generous-minded part of our tradition.
Thank you all very much for commenting on that question. Our second question, how important is it for the Dominican tradition to be an overt presence on the Albertus Magnus campus? And we will begin with Dr. Bourgeois.
Well, I think it's very important. Without the root, there can be no branches. Without the branches, there's going to be no fruit. I mean, we have to keep it alive. And it would be, to have an 800-year-old tradition of this distinction and richness and not cultivate it would be to commit a kind of suicide. We have an immensely rich and useful and purposeful tradition. And I think we can only gain as scholars and teachers by becoming adepts in the tradition. It brings a sense of pride and a sense of identity and community. It advances our objective, mentioned by Sister Pat, of producing citizens and saints and not just consumers. And the tradition contains deep resources to prepare global citizens. It's a global outfit and has concerned itself specifically and explicitly with global concerns for at least 500 years. So I think it's important.
Thank you. Court?
I think it's definitely extremely important to keep a practical presence of the Dominican tradition here at Albertus. In my experience, prior to attending the colloquium, I knew about the theory of having the Dominican tradition on campus. I had experienced some of it in my coursework, but I was struggling to bring it alive within my own courses. And I think the link I was missing was my practical, alive experience of Dominican tradition. And the colloquium gave that to me. And when you experience both the theory and also the practical side, it really brought it to life, and I was better able to express it to others, or at least I hope that I have been. And it's so closely linked with our mission, searching for truth, but also being practical in its application. I find that practical application of our tradition is essential and extremely important for us as we continue into the future.
Thank you. Our third question, what are the points of contact and difference between the Dominican tradition and contemporary secular culture? And Dr. Coffey, would you begin?
Points of contact. Let's start with differences first. I think what can't be overlooked in a conversation like this is the broader context. We are going through an unprecedented cultural shift in the broader culture, both in its depth and in its rapidity, and that's major. We live in interesting times. And just to give you an example, when Thomas lived, there weren't half a billion people in the world. When Columbus discovered America, there probably were about 500,000 people in the world. When Thomas Jefferson died, there might have been 1 billion. In 1930, there were 2 billion. In 1960, there were 3 billion. In 1974, there were 4 billion. In 1970, in 1987, there were 5 billion. In 1999, there were 6 billion. In 2011, there were 7 billion. Something is happening here. And the shift in culture is not, it's not just a shift in culture, it's economic, political, social, every way you can imagine. We're living in a tsunami of change, a tornado of change, a hurricane of change, and that's very important. Most important from my perspective is we're living through cultural change. That means that something's dying and something else is going to be born. Usually what happens is, like the snake, when the snake loses its skin, but the essentials continue in some way, I think that's what's going to happen. And we don't know what that's going to look like. I think we're in the middle of that process now, both in the wider church and certainly in its Dominican perspective. I think that's the case. The Pew Forum tells us that 33% of those born Catholic changed their religion in this country now. That's the major point of difference. We live in a very different time. It would have been unthinkable when Columbus discovered America in the northwestern world, in the Western world, not to believe in God. Now it's just an option. So we've got to take that into consideration as a major point of contact. I think it's important that we identify in that topology what kind of institution we are and what's possible for us, to be realistic about that. I think there are some significant points of very interesting, I think Rob alluded to, two of them. One is the faith and reason, science versus religion issue. Albert, Thomas, Meister Eckhart were intensely aware of the continuity between the natural and the supernatural, between nature and religion. Race builds on nature. And in that context, it makes the opposition between science and religion and faith and reason unfair. And I think as a Dominican college, we should stand for that. We should somehow work for the reconciliation of faith and religion. The other, I think, the very important point of contact will be one of the talks that we did here, the last plenary talk was by a man named Paul Murray. He was a Dominican friar, a teacher at the Angelican in Rome, and a poet and theologian. And what he did was he did a literary critique of 4 of Thomas Aquinas' Eucharistic poems, Panis Angelicus, and I forget the others, Pange Lingua, Adoro Te Devote, and one of those we're familiar with, but La Luce di Salvatore. What they express is the presence of God in the material world. I think it's important for us to realize the potential for understanding nature as the vehicle for the sacramental presence of the divine. And I think that's a very important point of contact that we make. That's actually a hallmark of Dominican tradition. After all, among all his other achievements, Albertus was a conspicuous scientist before we had the scientific method. And Thomas embraced Aristotle's focus on the natural world. And I think that's something that is a significant point of contact for us.
And Dr. Bourgeois?
The Dominican theology is one which looks for the face of God in humanity. And in thinking about this question, I wrote down, like the students of today, this is in points of continuity, the Dominican community in New Spain 500 years ago sought God in the wilderness of greed, cynicism, and heartlessness, even in the church. Like those Dominicans, our students are open to finding God in the space between the gospel and the realities of the world, the space between dogma and real life. Students have a natural compassion for those left out of the banquet, the unloved, unfree, unwanted, and underestimated. The Dominicans found God precisely
among these outcasts. So in this increasingly packed world with 7 billion, the practice and cultivation of compassion and seeing the face of God in the oppressed is more urgent than ever.
And now our last question before we open it up to everyone else. How do we remain a college in the Dominican tradition if the presence of the Dominican sisters on campus should end? And Dr. Coffey, since you have the microphone, do you want to start?
I don't know. Until things become clearer, I think we have to have a conversation about what's possible for us. The things that I expect are needs. I think we should cultivate more rituals. I think they're profoundly important rituals that celebrate our Dominican heritage. My experience here in Albertus is the holy month, the month that has the most religious energy that I've experienced here is November. The combination of All Saints and the Feast of Albertus the Great. I think we should capitalize on that. We should honor our ancestors more. And we're starting to do that, I think, because now we have a speaker at Thomas Aquinas, and Catherine Siena is a speaker that comes around these days. And so we started to hold up those paths. Honoring your ancestors is a worldwide, and I think we can certainly begin to do that. And even the smaller rituals, the rituals of candlelight day and the ritual of the graduation ceremony, perhaps make that a little more conspicuously Dominican event. Hold up that I think we can do. I think we can think about the ways in which our curriculum and our offerings are tied into the essentials of the Dominican message, perhaps. And I think we're trying to do that with the Invitation to Insight course and several other courses in philosophy of religion, especially in terms of bringing together this perspective of the natural and the supernatural. But that's as far as my thoughts are about it.
Corey?
Some of my thoughts are similar to Dr. Coffey. My initial thought is I hope it doesn't happen. I think that the sisters really they really help us maintain that tradition, or Dominican tradition. I agree the candlelight ceremony in other traditions we have on campus we can develop and perhaps add more of a Dominican presence to those. I think it's important, as Dr. Coffey mentioned, the 4 types of Catholic institutions for us to be aware of where we are, perhaps where we want to be, and keep that in mind as we move forward to build our traditions, especially, as you mentioned, with more than 7 million people and the choice to be religious. The belief on that has changed, how Albertus will fit into all of that moving forward. And maintaining that practicality of our tradition, as we talked about earlier. I hope that we can continue to work, I think we have the curriculum with Insight and our senior humanities courses, as well as philosophy of religion, to foster that Dominican tradition within our coursework and make it active and practical.
Thank you. As a Dominican sister, I'm going to come out of my role as the moderator for a minute to comment on this question. I certainly don't know whether and how long the sisters will be a walking presence among us. I know the Dominican Sisters of Peace will continue to sponsor the college and to be members of the Board of Trustees. However, when I listen to our participants today, I do not worry about the Dominican tradition not being continued on, because the Dominican order, if we look at the whole family, is made up of priests, friars, and brothers, the nuns, the sisters, but the laity. And it is the laity that will carry this tradition forward. I do believe the more we have exposure to the things that our participants were able to have, the more it will become embedded in the community, both for the students and for the faculty and staff. So on behalf of all of us, I think you caught the spirit, you communicate the spirit, and I know it will continue to thrive with people like yourselves. So thank you for all those comments. Now, we have a few minutes left, about 7 minutes or so, and we'd like to open up the forum to the rest of you if you have any comments or questions, either for our participants or something you just want to say to each other, because this is a forum and we communicate with one another. Chelsea Sherrod, who is my work study, will come around with a microphone. I'm going to take one of the microphones away from them. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, if you just kind of would raise your hand, or she'll come with the microphone to you.
One of the questions that Sister Ann asked had to do with how do you take the Dominican mission of the college and move it from something which is implicit in what we do in service learning programs, in to some extent the sort of concept of reflection and faith and reason. How do you make it from implicit to explicit? And can you give me a specific example of making the Dominican mission to some extent implicit or explicit in, to some extent, what you do or in your curriculum or courses or something else?
I think that's a very difficult, at the moment that's difficult. I can just tell you that since coming back to the club, but even before that, in thinking about, for example, all my work is in the core of general education. Thinking about that, there is an explicit consciousness of being continuous with a strong strand of community tradition. I should also point out, though, that the community tradition also has conspicuous figures who are instrumental in the combination of ballet, so we should take that as a caution. But since the colloquium, I've been much more careful in my classrooms that when something like this happens to bring up the fact that it is in fact part of the community heritage. I don't know how widespread that can be. I don't know how problematic that can be. But to make people aware that there is a root out of which this particular idea is connected, and it has a history. It's not just something or some of it.
Thank you. Anybody else out here have a comment? Debbie, over here.
Yesterday in the New York Times, I read with interest conservative Cardinal Timothy Dolan's move to have liberal Dorothy Day canonized. And it would seem that the connection is their interest in social justice. So I'm wondering, and my understanding of Dominicanism is that social justice is very much at the heart of Dominican beliefs. So my question to you is, where do you see the evolution of social justice occurring as we move into the 21st century? Do you see it coming from the hierarchical structures of the church, or do you see it coming from the laity?
Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. I immediately sent a link to that article to my religious studies class. I think it's going to be more ground up than top down, more bottom up than top down, just in the nature of things, because those who have very infrequently give to those who have not. With the Dominicans in New Spain, it was a big struggle and remains so to this day. I don't think liberation theology is going to die, even though it's been reprimanded, because it's too rich and it's too relevant. and there are great minds who are elaborating in unholy liberation theology. I'm just a student of the Dominican tradition and learning about it and educating myself, but I certainly encounter it all the time among numerous theologians and missionaries. So I don't think it's going to die anytime soon. It will come from I think it will come from the laity and the clergy, but not from the hierarchy. We will have to work to absorb it.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I know people have classes, but I hope that some of these conversations can continue beyond the forum, and I look forward to having people who will attend Dominican programs this summer be able to be part of our forum next year so that we can enrich one another. On behalf of all of us who participated in one of these programs, I want to again thank the President of the College and the Dominican Sisters of Peace who helped to fund our participation in these programs. I also want to thank Andrea Kovacs and the Advancement Office for sponsoring this gathering. But I especially want to thank our participants and all of you for attending. But I think we ought to give a little clap to our participants. I hope in the future more of us will be able to attend the programs that our 3 participants attended, or similar programs, so that together we can come to appreciate, understand, and have a greater commitment to our heritage. But the commitment to our heritage is to bring it alive and use it as a living heritage, as a springboard to plan our future for the college. So thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you all for taking this hour. Grateful.